Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time to continue on with my Nation Roulette series. If you're new to the channel, this is a series where I look at football in a plethora of countries across the globe and investigate its history and current state. We are making our way to the continent of Oceania for the second time in this series after a look at Fiji last year, and to be honest with you, this might well prove to be the greatest disparity in terms of country size and population in comparison with the previous episode in this series that I may ever do, as we move from covering India last time out to, as you can tell by the thumbnail and title of this video, Tuvalu. I would even go so far as to say this is easily the most obscure country that we have covered in this series thus far, and I don't think that is too bold of a claim to make, especially since it is located halfway between Australia and Hawaii, with the distance that Tuvalu are from those nations being around 2,500 miles. But that is the beauty of this series, looking at football across the globe, no matter how isolated or popular those countries may prove to be, and that is why I love this series so much. And if you go on to enjoy it as well, don't forget, hit the like button and subscribe if you have not done so already. But for now, let's investigate the footballing scene in the remote oceanic islands of Tuvalu. Tuvalu is a small country, and I'm talking extremely small, as the total land size of its 9 islands, 6 of them being atolls and 3 of them reefs, is just 10 square miles. That's right, 10 square miles. Or 26 square kilometers if you prefer to use that particular measurement. The estimated population is just 11,646 as of 2019, which puts them 229th across the world and just 11 places ahead of dead last, and it is one of the least visited countries globally, with fewer than 200 tourists each year, prior to the pandemic of course. This might be a partial factor in explaining why it is just one of 5 countries to have recorded absolutely 0 coronavirus cases, alongside Turkmenistan, Nauru, Tonga and North Korea, although it is perhaps safe to assume that North Korea have at least had a few, given its location. The islands were first inhabited in the 14th century by Samoans, with the region first being discovered by a European in 1568 by Alvaro de Mandanya of Spain, and by the 18th century it became known as the Cluster of 8 in respect of how many islands formed a part of the country, with Cluster of 8 being translated to Tuvalu. It became known as the Ellis Islands in 1892 when it fell under the British Protectorate, and during World War II it was used to house US forces in the Pacific, although the region would never experience any damage throughout the conflict. With the creation of the UN post-World War II, the UK committed to a process of decolonisation, and in 1974 the Ellis Islands and the neighbouring Gilbertese Islands, with whom they had internal conflict for a while, both held referendums to determine whether or not they should be considered as autonomous regions. They both voted to secede from the British rule, and in 1978, after being under the status of a colonial island for the previous few years, they finally gained independence and reverted back to their old name of Tuvalu, with the Gilbertese Islands going on to be called Kiribati. Within a year, the Tuvalu FA was set up, and they immediately competed in their first ever Pacific Games as an independent nation. They didn't start off very convincingly though, as in their debut game they were given a pasting by Tahiti, who triumphed 18-0, which perhaps unsurprisingly remains the nation's record defeat to this day. However, they would go on to beat Tonga 5-3 in their next game to qualify for the quarter-finals, as 2 teams from each 3-team group would progress, although they might as well wish they hadn't actually bothered, as in that quarter-final, New Caledonia stuck another 10 goals past them in a 10-2 annihilation. There would be some salvation though provided by what was called the Constellation Tournament. They beat their bitter rivals Kiribati on penalties in that quarter-final of the Constellation Tournament before losing 7-2 to Guam in the semi-finals, thus ending the tournament in precisely 8th place. It took until 2003 for them to participate in another Pacific Games football competition, and in the 4 times they have taken part since then, they have won just twice from 18 matches, scoring 14 and conceding 85, including 3 games of shipping 10 or more goals at the 2019 edition alone. In fact, between 1980 and 2002, they didn't play a single football fixture, only coming out of hibernation for the 2003 Pacific Games and for a warm-up friendly against Fiji, in which they were battered 9-0. In total, a representative Tuvalu national team has played just 36 official games in its entire history, all of which having been played overseas, winning 7, with their record being a 6-1 drubbing of the uninhabited US military base nation of the Chagos Islands, drawing 4, including the penalty shootout triumph against Kiribati in 1979, and losing the other 25. Only one player scored more than one recorded goal for them, that being Alopua Petoa, who has 9, and their most capped player is Mauro Peninsula on 14. A quite remarkable event in Tuvalu's footballing history occurred in 2008 when Paul Drijssen, a Dutch football fan, after catching wind of Tuvalu's then president of their FA going on a delegation to FIFA's Geneva headquarters to ask for membership, founded the Dutch Support Tuvalu Foundation alongside a group of other volunteers. With this link, Tuvalu were able to hire Foppe de Haan, who had previously coached the likes of the Dutch under-21 team and top flight side Heerenveen, as manager for the 2011 Pacific Games tournament, although he did leave after the tournament to return to Heerenveen's youth team setup. Furthermore, the national team would go on to tour the Netherlands in 2013, playing 20 games against local amateur sides on their 3-month trip, and it was later turned into a documentary entitled Mission Tuvalu, which was released later that year. Despite football being the most popular sport on the island, holding off challenges from volleyball and cricket, they are the second nation to feature in this series thus far after Greenland to not be affiliated to FIFA. It isn't for the want of trying though, as they have submitted applications to become members on quite a few occasions, with the president of their FA, Soselea Tinelau, stating that it would be imperative for football's development as it would receive a lot of financial assistance from FIFA to improve the standard of the game and produce more coaches and players to help them progress even further. Alas, all other applications thus far have been unsuccessful, with the primary reason being a lack of substantial footballing infrastructure, given that there is just one national stadium in the country, the Tuvalu Sports Ground, which is not only shared with rugby teams but is also adjacent to a runway, with players allegedly training on the grass of said runway, as well as the dearth of hotels to accommodate foreign teams. In spite of this, they are actually members of the OFC, having become affiliated with them in 2006, and that has provided them with more funds in the last year or so as a result of OFC granting associate members access to take part in developmental programs and receive various forms of aid, such as money and equipment, to help their cause, although as was perhaps to be expected, they haven't qualified as of yet for the OFC Cup. Bizarrely, in 2007, the OFC decided to use the South Pacific Games, which Tuvalu took part in, as the first round of qualifying for the 2010 World Cup, and it meant that Tuvalu thus became the first ever nation to take part in World Cup qualifying without actually being FIFA members. They lost their first game 16-0 to Fiji and were promptly eliminated after 1 draw and 3 losses from their 4 games, meaning that, inevitably, they have never qualified for a World Cup, although imagine the logistical headaches that would have been induced should they have made it. They are also a part of CoNIFA, an organisation made up of nations attempting to become a part of FIFA in the near future, which includes the likes of Tibet, Northern Cyprus, Abkhazia and Kiribati. Tuvalu were welcomed into the collection in 2016 with open arms, with the president of CoNIFA at the time, Sasha Duerkop, criticising the need for Tuvalu to join CoNIFA in the first place as a result of the ignorance of both FIFA and the OFC, and stating that they should have joined FIFA a while back to aid their development even further, even going so far as to hiring a lawyer for them to aid them in their applications to FIFA should they be rejected or put through to the Court of Arbitration of Sports. They took part in the 2018 CoNIFA World Cup, which was held in London across various non-league stadiums as a replacement for their neighbours Kiribati, although in a group with Titans Matabeleland, Padania and Jekeliland, they lost all 3 games by a collective scoreline of 15-1. Sadly, they didn't even make it to the 2020 tournament in North Macedonia, although it was cancelled anyway as a result of the effects of the pandemic, which, as mentioned earlier, Tuvalu have somehow, and allegedly it must be stressed, managed to avoid. There is another huge problem for the progress of Tuvalu in football, and that is the effect of climate change that will potentially hinder them quicker than most, as scientists estimate that, with the sea levels rising by 0.2 inches each year, it's possible that each of the 9 islands could be submerged within 100 years, which could prove to put a bit of a spanner in the works. I wouldn't like to end on a somber note though, especially since I haven't talked about their league yet, because yes, there actually is one. The Tuvalu A Division was established in 1999 and formalised in 2001, and 8 of the 9 islands have a representative team who take part in the league, with Niue Lakita being the only island without one. As would be expected, all of the teams play at the Tuvalu Sports Ground, and the league lasts for a couple of months each time, mostly at the start of each year and no later than April, with each of the 8 teams competing playing each other just once. The most successful team in the league's history are Nolti FC, who are based in the country's primary island of Funafuti, with 14 league titles to their name, including 10 in a row between 2007 and 2016. However, they didn't win this year's competition as they came second behind Vaitupu-based FC Tofaga, who managed to lift their maiden league trophy, and only Haipi United, Tamanuku and Vaula FC have competed in the league and never won it, with the other 5 teams having lifted the trophy at some point over the last 22 years. Weirdly, as far as I could see at the very least, it was actually won by the Tuvalu national team in 2018, which does seem to put the other teams at a slight disadvantage, although that may just be me. And that just about wraps up today's video looking at the footballing scene in the CoNIFA and OFC affiliated but not yet FIFA affiliated country of Tuvalu. If you did enjoy this video, as I said at the start, like it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and ring the notification bell to get notified whenever I upload a video straight away. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.